What if the smartest thing you could say was actually nothing at all? Imagine being in a room full of people, and the most respected man there is the one who speaks the least. You see, the real power of intelligent men doesn't lie in what they say, but in what they choose not to say. Welcome to Stoic Bloom. I'm glad you're here, because what we're about to explore could change how you view yourself and how others see you too. Here's the truth. Truly intelligent men have a secret. And no, it's not that they have all the answers or that they can list the capital cities of every country by heart. Their power, it's quieter, more subtle. It's knowing when to hold their tongue. Because sometimes what you don't say speaks louder than the most brilliant quote. Over the years, I've spent countless hours immersed in both ancient Stoic philosophy and modern human behavior. Whether I was poring over the writings of Seneca or simply watching people interact at a busy cafe, one thing kept standing out. The wisest men I observed all had something in common. They don't speak unless it matters. They don't rush to fill silence. And they never ever say things that damage their credibility. So today, we're diving into 7 phrases that truly intelligent men never say. Not because they're perfect, but because they've learned, often through painful experience, that these words lead nowhere good. Let's start with the first one. I already know that. It sounds harmless enough, maybe even confident. But beneath that polished surface lies something much less flattering. A closed mind. And any intelligent man knows that the moment we convince ourselves there's nothing left to learn, we stop growing completely. I had to learn this lesson the hard way. Years ago, I was working under a mentor, an older man who carried himself with quiet strength, the kind of man who had faced enough battles to understand the value of speaking less, not more. We were reviewing a process I had done dozens, maybe hundreds of times. As he began explaining a detail, I cut in without thinking. Yeah, I already know that. He paused, gave me a look, calm but heavy, and then moved on. It wasn't until that evening that it hit me. I hadn't just interrupted him, I had robbed myself of something far more valuable, the chance to see what he saw, the chance to learn what his experience had taught him. Lessons not found in any manual or training video. Things that only time and mistakes can teach. When we say, I already know that, what we're really saying is, I have nothing left to learn. That's not intelligence. That's arrogance, dressed up to look like competence. And Stoic philosophy, it cuts through that illusion like a blade, because in the Stoic tradition, true wisdom begins where pride ends. Previously, we talked about how the phrase, I already know that, shuts the door to growth. Now let's go deeper into the very root of that mindset, the ego. Marcus Aurelius didn't mince words when he warned, you cannot learn anything if you believe you already know everything. And he was right, because it's not ignorance that holds us back. It's our ego, that subtle, relentless urge to appear smart, to protect the image we've spent years building. But here's the danger. Ego convinces us we're standing on solid ground, when in truth, we're just balancing on a fragile ledge called pride. Intelligent men understand something vital. Knowledge isn't a trophy. It's not something you win, display, and forget. It's a river, constantly flowing, always evolving. You might step into the same stream twice, but the water, it's never the same. I once witnessed something that drove this lesson home. A seasoned carpenter gray at the temples, with decades of experience, stood quietly as a young apprentice explained a woodworking technique. A technique the old man had likely mastered years ago. But he didn't interrupt. He didn't correct. He listened. He nodded, asked thoughtful questions, and even thanked the apprentice for sharing. Later, I asked him why. Why not just tell the kid, "I already know that"? He smiled gently and said, "Because sometimes you learn more by listening to how someone else sees it. That, my friend, is wisdom. The quiet kind of intelligence that doesn't need to prove itself. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, 'I've heard this before,' pause. Listen anyway, not out of politeness, but because within that familiar story there might be a new detail, a slight shift in perspective, a subtle nuance that changes everything. And even if nothing new comes of it, what you do gain is practice. You sharpen humility, you show respect, and in the long run, that makes you someone others actually want to listen to. In Stoicism, this is called mastery of the self, the quiet strength to set aside pride in pursuit of truth, the courage to remain a lifelong student. Because in the Horace end, that's the kind of intelligence that outlasts accolades, titles, and clever words. Now, let's move on to the second phrase, intelligent men never say. That's impossible. Several years ago, I worked with a man named Robert. On the surface, he was everything a leader should be, sharp, steady, and capable of carrying the weight of an entire company without ever showing the strain. But there was one thing Robert said often, almost reflexively, "That's impossible." Every time someone brought up a fresh idea, whether it was entering a new market, modernizing an outdated system, or even reaching out to a difficult client, his answer was the same: "That's impossible." At first, it sounded like common sense, grounded, practical. After all, who has time to chase fantasies? But as the months passed, a painful truth became clearer. It wasn't the idea Robert was shutting down, it was himself. Each time he said those words, what he was really expressing wasn't logic, it was limitation, his own fears, his own mental walls, and the Stoics. They knew this pattern all too well. Coming up next, we'll uncover exactly why saying "that's impossible" reveals more about your mindset than the situation itself, and what intelligent men say instead. Last time we saw how saying "that's impossible" often reveals not the limits of reality, but the limits of our mindset. Let's take that idea one step further. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And that's exactly what Robert was doing. He wasn't evaluating situations with clear eyes. He was projecting his own fear onto them. Fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of trying and not measuring up. It's a subtle kind of fear, the kind that wears a disguise. It doesn't shout, it doesn't tremble. Instead, it cloaks itself in logic, in caution, in what seems like sound practicality. But underneath all that, it's the belief that if we can't see the whole road ahead, we shouldn't even take the first step. That belief is what keeps so many men stuck, small, silent, still. But Stoic philosophy slices clean through that illusion. It reminds us the obstacle is not the problem. Our perception of the obstacle, that is what defeats us. I experienced this lesson firsthand. Years after working with Robert, I joined a project that, on paper, should have failed. The budget was tight. The deadline? unrealistic. And the team was green, eager but lacking experience. Everything in me screamed that it couldn't be done. All the logical voices said, "Don't even try." But this time, I didn't say, "That's impossible." Instead, I asked a different question. What can I control today? What's the very next step I can take? We didn't perform miracles. We simply moved forward, step by step. And that project? It became one of the most successful I've ever been part of because we weren't paralyzed by the size of the mountain. We just kept climbing, one foothold at a time. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. And that's the turning point. Because when a man says, "That's impossible," he's surrendering before the battle even begins. But intelligent men? They see something else. They understand that what feels impossible is often just unfamiliar. It's not a wall. It's a gate, one that only opens to those willing to step forward. They know that real strength isn't built by avoiding challenges, but by meeting them again and again, especially when the odds aren't in their favor. That's Stoic courage. Not blind positivity, but disciplined, steady action. Persistence with purpose. Life will always present hard things. That's not the problem. The real danger is labeling those things impossible and locking the door on ourselves. But the man who dares to take one small step, even when the future is uncertain, he opens doors that others never even notice. That's not just intelligence, that's wisdom, forged through effort. Now let's talk about the third phrase. Intelligent men never say, "That's not my fault," because few things damage a man's integrity more than those four little words. Previously, we examined how labeling something as impossible isn't a statement about reality. It's a reflection of our own fear. Now let's explore another phrase that quietly robs us of power. That's not my fault. At first, it feels justified. When something goes wrong at work, in a relationship, or just in life, our instinct is to protect ourselves, to point out where the blame truly lies. And sure, sometimes others do mess up. But here's the deeper truth. Every time we push responsibility away, we hand our power away with it. Intelligent men understand this at their core. They've learned that responsibility isn't about assigning blame, it's about maintaining influence. And when you refuse to take responsibility, even for just a small piece of the problem, you give up the only thing that can truly change the outcome, yourself. I remember witnessing this in real time with a friend of mine named Michael. He lost a major client, a big one. His reaction, immediate self-defense. He listed all the reasons it wasn't his fault. The client was unreasonable, the market was unstable. His team had dropped the ball, and to be fair, a lot of that was true. But while he was busy explaining why he wasn't to blame, something more important slipped through his fingers. The opportunity to learn, to adapt, to improve. Instead, he stayed stuck repeating the same mistakes, convinced the fault always lay with someone or something else. What Michael didn't see was this. By refusing to own even one small part of what happened, he surrendered the only thing he actually controlled, his response. The Stoics warned us about this kind of thinking. They taught that we should focus on what's within our control and release everything else. Epictetus said it best. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And that's the real turning point. Because when we say, "That's not my fault," we place the power to fix the situation in someone else's hands. We wait for them to apologize, for them to fix it, for them to be better. But the moment we accept even a small piece of the responsibility, something shifts. We reclaim control. We move from passive to active, from powerless to powerful. In my own life, I've seen this pattern clearly. Whenever I've taken responsibility, even when others were clearly more at fault, it changed me. It opened doors I hadn't noticed. Sometimes it was as simple as saying, "I should have communicated that better," or "I could have prepared more." And that simple act, owning my part, built trust with myself, with others, because it shows that I'm not a man who waits to be rescued or proven right. I act. Blame is easy. Responsibility? That's hard. But it's also where real strength begins. The Stoics remind us we are not here to escape life's difficulties. We're here to rise above them. And rising begins with one powerful question. What can I do differently? Next time, up next, we'll face another phrase that smart men avoid because it kills confidence before it ever has a chance to grow in the last part. We explored how taking responsibility, rather than placing blame, is the mark of true strength. Now let's uncover another quiet trap that intelligent men learn to avoid. The illusion of self-sufficiency. I don't need any help. It sounds noble, doesn't it? Strong, independent, stoic. It's a line we've been taught to admire. We picture the lone wolf, the self-made man who never leans on anyone, the hero who carries every burden in silence, forging his path through sheer grit and will. But beneath that polished surface lies a dangerous lie. Because the refusal to ask for help is rarely about strength. More often, it's about pride, quiet, corrosive, and blinding. The kind of pride that isolates us, that whispers, "You should be able to do this alone." The kind that makes us suffer in silence, thinking it's some kind of virtue. But over time, that silence doesn't build resilience. It erodes it, slowly, invisibly. I was reminded of this while reading about one of history's most iconic leaders, Abraham Lincoln. We often imagine Lincoln as a solitary figure, weary, burdened, shouldering the weight of a divided nation through the horrors of the Civil War. And in many ways, he was stoic, measured, alone. But what many overlook is how deeply Lincoln relied on others. He surrounded himself with people who challenged his thinking. He sought out advice, even from those who disagreed with him, not because he lacked confidence, but because he had the humility to know he didn't have all the answers. During one of the bloodiest moments of the war, the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln personally visited General McClellan. Despite their tense relationship, he made the trip to listen, to understand, to gather insight. And back in Washington, he often met with his cabinet, the famous team of rivals, men with clashing views, competing visions, even personal grievances. Why? Because he valued perspective over pride. That wasn't weakness. That was strength measured by humility. And that's the truth intelligent men eventually learn. Self-reliance is essential, but it was never meant to be absolute. Even the Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man of his era, wrote openly in Meditations about the many people who shaped him, his mentors, his friends, his teachers. He detailed what each one taught him and how their guidance influenced his thoughts and character. This was an emperor, ruler of the Roman Empire, openly admitting that he owed his wisdom to others. So ask yourself, if he didn't pretend to have all the answers, why should we? And yet so many of us do. We convince ourselves that reaching out is weakness, that asking for help is a sign of failure. But is it? Next, we'll explore how this mindset quietly undermines us and why. The men who learn to lean on others aren't weaker, they're wiser. In the last section, we revealed the truth behind the phrase, "I don't need any help," how it often masks pride more than it reflects strength. Now let's go deeper into the emotional cost of carrying burdens alone. Sometimes we believe that asking for help is a sign we've failed to be strong enough, tough enough, man enough. But that belief, it's a trap, a quiet one, a slow one. It locks us inside our own minds where the pressure builds quietly, relentlessly, until we're drowning in problems we were never meant to face alone. And here's the worst part. When we don't reach out, we don't just hurt ourselves. We also rob the people around us of the chance to give, the chance to support, to contribute, to connect. We cut off the invisible thread that binds people together, mutual support. And yes, I've fallen into that trap myself. There was a time when I truly believed I had to carry it all, every responsibility at work, every expectation in the family, every demand that came with the image of being strong. I thought keeping it all together meant keeping it all to myself, but all it did was drain me. Not just my energy, but my clarity, my confidence, my spirit. The turning point came quietly. I finally confided in someone I trusted. I said the words out loud, "I can't do this alone." And what I got in return wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was understanding, support, a moment of real human connection that restored something I hadn't even realized I'd lost. And in that moment of vulnerability, something clicked. I realized true strength doesn't come from how long you can stand alone. It comes from knowing when to reach out and when to accept the hand that's reaching back. The Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that we are not isolated beings. We are interconnected. Epictetus reminds us that no man is an island. We were made for cooperation, for mutual aid, and when we pretend otherwise, when we insist on struggling alone, we go against the natural rhythm of life itself. Real strength is not diminished when you ask for help. It's defined by it, because asking for help takes more than effort. It takes courage, it takes honesty. And those are the hallmarks of an intelligent, grounded man, one who understands that carrying the weight of the world alone isn't noble, it's unnecessary. So the next time you feel that familiar pull, the urge to say, "I've got this, I don't need anyone," pause. Ask yourself honestly, is that strength talking, or is it just pride in disguise? And remember Lincoln, who led with wisdom, not ego. A man powerful enough to know even the strongest leaders still need others. To stand tall. Now let's move into the fifth phrase, another silent thief of progress. I'm too old for that. It sounds harmless, maybe even humorous, but the belief underneath? It can quietly close the door on everything that still lies ahead. Previously, we challenged the idea that real strength means doing everything alone. Now, let's confront another quiet lie that holds many men back, the belief that they're too old to begin again. Now, I'm too old for that. It sounds innocent enough, maybe even practical. Sometimes it's delivered with a shrug, wrapped in a self-deprecating joke, but beneath those words often hides something heavier. Resignation. A quiet belief that the best parts of life are already behind us. But intelligent men recognize the danger in this thinking, because this phrase isn't just limiting, it's quietly toxic. It eats away at purpose. It convinces us to settle, to step back, to stop exploring, and over time, it leads to a subtle surrender of all the life that's still waiting to be lived. I once came across a story that struck me deeply. There was a man named Harry Bernstein. For most of his life, Harry worked quietly as a magazine editor. He raised a family, paid his bills, did what needed to be done. And then, at the age of 93, he made a bold decision. He would write his first book, not a blog post, not a journal entry, a full-length memoir. He called it The Invisible Wall, a story about his childhood in a poor English town, divided by religion and prejudice. Publishers rejected it many times, but Harry didn't give up. Finally, at 96 years old, his book hit the shelves. It went on to receive international acclaim, translated into multiple languages, touching hearts across continents. And he didn't stop there. He went on to publish 3 more books after that. What inspired me most wasn't the success, it was the courage. The courage to believe that life still had more for him, that even in his 90s he wasn't finished learning, growing, or contributing. And that kind of courage? It isn't reserved for rare men like Harry. It's a choice, a decision that faces all of us, sometimes more often than we realize. Do we listen to the voice that whispers, "It's too late"? Or do we ask instead, "What can I still become?" The Stoics were crystal clear on this. To them, age meant nothing to the soul. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, yes, death is inevitable. But until it arrives, our duty is to live fully, honestly, and courageously. He believed that wisdom didn't come from age. It came through those who stayed curious and humble as the years passed. Growth, to him, didn't fade with time, it ripened. And I've seen that truth myself. I've watched men in their 60s learn new trades, launch businesses, mentor younger men. They didn't retreat from life, they doubled down. And I've also seen the opposite. Men who let regret and time weigh so heavily on them that they withdrew, convinced it was too late to begin again. But the difference between those two paths, it wasn't health, it wasn't luck, it wasn't even money. It was mindset. A man who says, "I'm too old for that," has already locked the door. But a man who asks, "What can I do now?" he throws that door wide open again, because age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly. It qualifies us to live with more depth, more clarity, and more to offer: experience, resilience, perspective. These aren't signs of someone who's finished. They're the tools of someone who's just getting started. Next, we'll face yet another phrase that holds men back, a subtle one that kills motivation from the inside out. That's just how Previously, we explored how age isn't a barrier. It's a gateway to deeper wisdom. Now we turn to a different kind of trap, one that doesn't shout or confront, but quietly steals our time: procrastination. I'll do it later. At first, it sounds harmless, rational, even responsible, like a quiet promise we're making to ourselves. But here's the truth. Later is where our best intentions go to die. It's the softest sounding lie we tell ourselves, and one of the most destructive. Wise men understand this. Many of them have learned, often through painful experience, that delaying what matters doesn't buy you more time. It steals it from you. Every time we say, "I'll call tomorrow," "I'll apologize next week," "I'll start when things calm down," what we're really doing is gambling with something we don't actually control: time. I once knew a man named Thomas. On the surface, he had it all: an impressive career, a beautiful family, respect from his peers. But he was always busy. Meetings, deadlines, travel. Too busy to make the call. Too busy to visit his aging father. Too busy to just be there. He told himself the same thing we all do: later, I'll go later, once things settle down. But then, without warning, later ran out. His father passed away. Suddenly, no more visits, no more fishing trips, no more second chances. What Thomas was left with was a phone full of unsent drafts and a heart full of things left unsaid. He told me this story not for sympathy, but as a warning, because the truth is, we all think we have time until we don't. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, reminded himself daily that death could come at any moment, not to be dark or dramatic, but to wake himself up to what really mattered. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't just poetic reflection. It was practice, a mindset, a deliberate sharpening of awareness, because intelligent men know the clock doesn't belong to us. Time doesn't wait for our readiness. It doesn't care about your plans, your comfort, your excuses. What you postpone today, you may never have the chance to do tomorrow. That's why wise men act now. They make the phone call they've been putting off. They take that awkward but necessary step toward healing a broken relationship. They start the project they've been planning for years. Not because it's easy, but because they've realized later is not guaranteed. And next, we'll expose one final phrase, one that sounds like acceptance, but quietly kills transformation. That's just how I am. In the last part, we saw how later is a lie that steals time and opportunities. Now let's tackle another dangerous phrase, one that disguises itself as self-awareness, but silently shuts the door on growth. That's just how I am. At a first glance, it sounds like honesty, a declaration of identity. But when you look closer, this phrase is something far more limiting. It's not a reflection of truth. It's a quiet surrender, a subtle decision to stop evolving. When a man says, "That's just how I am," he's placing a full stop where there should be a comma. He's closing the book on his own potential and convincing himself the final chapter's already written. But intelligent men avoid this mindset. Why? Because they understand something most people ignore. We are not fixed. We are not doomed to repeat our past habits or live under the shadow of outdated identities. Who we are is shaped moment by moment by the choices we make, especially the ones we make repeatedly. The moment a man claims, "I can't change," he's not describing a limitation of character. He's refusing to take responsibility for it. I've seen this many times. A man loses his temper again and again. When someone calls him out, he shrugs. That's just how I am. Another man avoids intimacy, afraid of being vulnerable. He tells himself, "That's just who I've always been." But these aren't reflections of reality. They're not facts. They're excuses. Excuses that give fear permission to take the wheel. Excuses that let inertia wear the mask of self-awareness. But if you look beneath those words, what you'll really find is resistance. Resistance to change. Resistance to discomfort. Resistance to the truth that no man is ever finished becoming who he's meant to be. The Stoics didn't flinch in the face of this truth. They believed we are not prisoners of our impulses, our upbringing, or our past decisions. Epictetus once wrote, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And just as we misjudge events, we often misjudge ourselves. It's not our nature that traps us. It's our refusal to challenge that nature, to reshape it, refine it, rise above it. The Stoics believed that change is not only possible, it's essential, because the man who sees himself as complete has already stopped growing. Coming up next, we'll take this even further, examining how identity becomes a tool for transformation or a trap of limitation, depending on just one thing: your willingness to choose differently. In the last section, we confronted the phrase, "That's just how I am," for what it truly is, a quiet refusal to grow. Now, let's look deeper at what really holds us back, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. It's not our circumstances that limit us, it's our beliefs, our inner narrative, the quiet, often unspoken stories we've rehearsed so many times that they start to sound like truth. But growth, real growth, requires more than motivation. It demands discomfort. It asks us to turn inward, to look honestly at the patterns we've built and the pain we've normalized, simply because it feels familiar. And that's the hard part, letting go of what we've come to know, even when it no longer serves us. But the Stoics believed that self-mastery is the highest pursuit, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary if we want to live a life of depth and meaning. Growth doesn't happen by accident. It requires honesty, the kind that asks us to face questions we often avoid. Am I really this way? Or have I just gotten used to avoiding the work it takes to change? Intelligent men don't shy away from those questions. They choose the harder path, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but out of respect for who they are now and for who they still have the potential to become. Because wisdom isn't some shiny trophy you earn once and put on display. It's a practice, a discipline, a quiet daily commitment to becoming a better version of yourself, not because you hate who you are now, but because you love yourself enough not to stay the same. In the end, "That's just how I am" is a phrase that locks the door on possibility. But the Stoics remind us, life itself is change. Nature is change. To resist change is to resist life itself. The man who understands this truth doesn't fear change. He welcomes it. He sees himself as a work in progress, unfinished, evolving, becoming. And in that mindset lies true wisdom. So if you've ever caught yourself saying one of these 7 phrases, trust me, you're not alone. I've been there too, more times than I care to admit. But here's the good news. Intelligent men aren't the ones who never fall into these traps. They're the ones who notice it. They pause, they reflect, and then they choose better. That's exactly what we're doing here, choosing better. One thoughtful decision at a time. So which one spoke to you most today? Maybe it's time to let go of "that's just how I am." Or finally retire "I'll do it later" before later becomes never. Whatever it is, this is your moment, your invitation to take the next step. Because wisdom isn't about being perfect. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always moving forward. And if today's message stirred something in you, pass it on. Share it with someone who's walking this path beside you. And until next time, keep going. Not perfectly, but intentionally.